Hey, elementary lit class. So I just wanted to take some time to read to you the book Hannibal. So if you don't have this book at home, then you're able to still complete your reading assignment. I know I didn't have it, so a huge thanks to Mrs. Campbell for loaning me her copy. And today we're going to read chapters 1 through 4. To start out with, here's a little picture I'm going to show to you. It has a wicked web. This is a look at the allies and enemies of Hannibal. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but just wanted to give you a peek at some of the good guys and bad guys. All right, and we start out in Rome in 217 BC. On a summer day in 217 BC, a shocking rumor spread through the markets, streets, and temples of Rome. Was it true? There had been a terrible defeat? Had tens of thousands of Roman soldiers really been killed or captured? Frantic mothers and fathers begged military leaders in the city for word of their sons. Women and children wept, fearing they had lost their husbands and fathers. Finally, a crowd gathered in the Forum, Rome's central square. The crowd rushed to the Senate House, where the city's leaders were meeting in emergency session. The anxious citizens pounded at the doors until a senator finally stepped outside. Silence fell while the senator announced the truth to the crowd. "We have been defeated in a great battle," he declared. It took days for the full effects of the disaster to become known. At Lake Trasimene, a few hundred miles to the north, a mighty invading army had indeed slaughtered tens of thousands of Rome's best soldiers. Their corpses had been dragged into great piles and burned, filling the air with terrible smoke. Thousands more had been cut down in the water while trying to swim to safety. The lake turned red with the blood of Roman soldiers. The name of the man responsible for the bloodshed passed through the crowd that day like a cold wind. He was Hannibal Barca, the fearsome military leader from Carthage. Carthage, center of the great Punic Empire, was Rome's archenemy from the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. A year earlier, Hannibal had dragged his army across 2 mountain ranges and driven it into the heart of the Roman Republic. He had ravaged crops and looted villages to feed his hungry troops. He had won massive battles against the Roman army, one of the best trained fighting forces on earth. Now Hannibal was marching south toward Rome. The Roman senators scrambled to plan for the Republic's defense. They called for a dictator to direct military operations. The new leader sent out men to destroy bridges on the route to Rome. He ordered the city's walls and towers strengthened. Meanwhile, Romans prayed to their gods for help. Priests searched for omens of good fortune or bad. Some even offered human sacrifices in the hope that it would please the gods. For Hannibal, the terror he instilled in the Romans was a dream come true. As a boy, he had sworn to battle Rome until his dying breath. Now he was pursuing his mission with ruthless determination. It was a battle to the death between the world's 2 most powerful military forces. If Hannibal won, Carthage would control the vital Mediterranean Sea and all the lands around it. Rome would become an outpost in the Punic Empire. If he lost, once mighty Carthage would be squashed by the Roman Republic. The making of a commander. Hamilcar's son. A general's boy swears to oppose his father's archenemy. Hannibal was born in 247 BC in the city of Carthage. There's the city of Carthage. His father, Hamilcar Barca, was no doubt proud to have a son and heir to his fortune, but Hamilcar had little time to enjoy fatherhood. Carthage was at war, and as one of its most trusted military commanders, he had to defend the empire. At the time, the Punic Empire was one of the most advanced powers in the world. Its biggest city, Carthage, was home to about 400,000 people. It stood at the tip of North America on the shore of the Mediterranean Sea. Surrounded by massive walls and 2 soaring towers, the city overlooked 2 busy harbors. One harbor provided a wharf for trading ships, which brought a constant stream of gold, silver, textiles, and spices to the city's wealthy merchants. The other harbor sheltered Carthage's powerful navy, which was locked in a battle for control over the waters of the Mediterranean. At the time of Hannibal's birth, the Carthaginian military was stretched to its limits. The Roman Republic, which lay across the Mediterranean in present-day Italy, had been challenging Carthage for 17 years in the First Punic War. In 247 BC, all eyes were on Sicily, an island off the southern coast of Italy. Roman forces were on the move there. If they took control of Sicily, the Roman navy would control the trade routes of the Mediterranean. Before Hannibal's first birthday, Hamilcar Barca loaded his ships on his soldiers on ships, and sailed across to Sicily. He was greatly outnumbered by the Romans, who maintained a disciplined and well-trained army with countless reinforcements. But Hamilcar fought with intelligence and ferocity. The war dragged on for years. Here's a picture of his father. Finally, when Hannibal was 6 years old, the balance tipped in Rome's favor. In 241 BC, Carthage sent a fleet of 170 ships to supply Hamilcar with weapons, food, and reinforcements. Roman warships intercepted the Carthaginian fleet west of Sicily. The Romans used their unique corvus, or assault bridge, to great effect. The bridge swiveled out over the sea onto enemy vessels. Roman soldiers then stormed across and slaughtered their foes in hand-to-hand combat. Only 50 Carthaginian warships survived the battle. The ravaged fleet retreated home, leaving Hamilcar with no choice but to negotiate for peace. After 23 years of fighting, the First Punic War finally came to an end. Hamilcar was considered a hero, but he did not feel like one. The mighty Punic Empire had been humiliated. In exchange for peace, Carthage paid Rome a huge sum of money and gave up claims to the island of Sicily. Within 3 years, the Romans had taken over 2 more Mediterranean islands, Sardinia and Corsica. Hamilcar was left to wait and plot his revenge. The sea now lay under the control of the Roman navy. Hamilcar would have to attack by land. He decided he would take an army across the sea to Iberia, present-day Spain and Portugal. Hamilcar would build a base in Iberia and recruit new soldiers. When he was ready, he would attack Rome. Young Hannibal, meanwhile, spent his days learning Greek poetry and philosophy, but legend has it that he was drawn to his father's struggle while just a boy. When he was 9 years old, Hannibal supposedly found his father standing solemnly before a temple altar. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows over the walls. Hannibal listened as the priest told his father that the gods looked favorably upon his upcoming expedition. Hannibal asked his father where he was going. Hamilcar explained that he was leading an army to Iberia, and Hannibal begged to join his father on the adventure. Hamilcar thought for a moment and then asked his son to stand beside him. "Swear to be always an enemy of Rome," he commanded. Hannibal met his father's gaze. "I swear to be always an enemy of Rome." There's a picture of that event. Chapter 2, Iberian Training. Hannibal learns to be a soldier and a man. Not long after Hannibal swore his solemn oath against the Romans, he followed his father out of Carthage. Hamilcar had led the Carthaginian army west along the northern coast of Africa. In the center marched the infantry, thousands of foot soldiers in a long column with their shields glinting in the sun. To either side rode the cavalry atop well-groomed horses. Hundreds of pack animals trudged behind, carrying food and supplies. Somewhere in the procession, dozens of battle elephants plodded along, trained to batter enemy lines like primitive tanks. Slowly, the army made its way toward the Strait of Gibraltar, where it would make a short sea journey to Iberia. Along the way, Hannibal's father met with village leaders, many of whom contributed soldiers and supplies. Finally, the army boarded ships and made the crossing. They headed for the trading city of Gades on the Iberian coast. A Carthaginian ally, Gades would become Hamilcar's base. No one knows when young Hannibal started fighting with his father's army, but he saw a lot of action over the next 10 years. Slowly, Hamilcar's army swept through southern Iberia, conquering bands of Iberians and Celts. His men swung swords and flung spears, javelins, and rocks. Battles were bloody. There was little medical care for wounded men. A nasty cut or broken bone could be fatal. The Celts and Iberians had similar weapons, but they failed to unite against the Carthaginians. Fighting in small groups, they didn't stand a chance. Defeated chiefs often met a gruesome end. Hamilcar had them nailed to crosses as examples to others. Men who could be trusted were brought into the Carthaginian army. Those who could not were enslaved. Here's a picture of the Carthaginian army at war. You see him riding on elephant. In 228 BC, when Hannibal was 19 years old, his father's long military career came to an end. According to one story, Hamilcar died while protecting Hannibal and another son from a surprise attack organized by a local chief called Orisus. Hamilcar is said to have sent his sons away on horseback while he led the attackers on a chase across a river. Swept off his horse, he was carried downriver and drowned. Hannibal mourned his father's death. At the same time, he had been taught to believe that sacrifice was part of the life of a noble warrior. He had grown up believing that the powerful Barca family was meant to serve the glory of Carthage. Hannibal might have thought back to the oath he'd sworn 10 years before. For a moment, he likely considered that he would end up like his father one day, a soldier killed in battle. So be it. His father had lived and died an enemy of Rome, and so would he. Chapter 3, War Must Go On. Hannibal's brother-in-law takes over and builds a kingdom. Hannibal may have been eager to take command of the army, but he was not yet ready. His brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, took over instead. Hannibal watched and learned as Hasdrubal extended the Punic Empire's control over Iberia. Carthage's new army commander was handsome, smart, and brutal. He began his command by avenging Hamilcar's death. With a force of more than 50,000, Hasdrubal slaughtered the chief Arisus and any of his followers he could find. Hasdrubal followed this display of brute force with skillful diplomacy. He met with the southern chieftains who were still independent. He offered them protection from the Celts in the north if they pledged their loyalty to Carthage. Most of them agreed, bringing new soldiers into the army without costly fighting. Hasdrubal and his men then built a city on the eastern shore of Iberia. They called it New Carthage. It quickly became a trading center filled with soldiers and merchants. The city had an excellent harbor. Nearby forests provided the huge supply of timber needed to rebuild Carthage's navy. Rich mines produced piles of silver to send home to Carthage. Hasdrubal built himself a palace and ruled southern Iberia as a king. He even minted silver coins with his own image on them. Across the Mediterranean, the leaders of the Punic Empire viewed New Carthage with mixed feelings. They were happy to see the empire extended, but the Barca family's ambition worried some senators. Hasdrubal had grown powerful and hard to control. His aggression toward Rome brought back bad memories from the First Punic War. If Rome was angered, Carthage could be completely destroyed. But Hasdrubal's success caused even more anxiety in Rome. In 226 BC, Roman ambassadors arrived in New Carthage to negotiate the fate of Iberia. The two sides agreed that Carthage would control all of southern Iberia, except the city of Saguntum, which was already allied with Rome. The Roman Republic would control the north. Once again, Hannibal had watched Hasdrubal achieve his goals through diplomacy. Hasdrubal knew he was not yet strong enough to fight the Romans. He needed time to bring supplies and soldiers to Iberia. In the meantime, peace with Rome would make the Mediterranean safe for Carthage's merchant ships. During his 7 years under Hasdrubal's command, Hannibal also learned how to fight. In small battles with Iberian and Celtic tribesmen, he proved himself agile and strong. He stayed calm in the heat of battle. He became Hasdrubal's most trusted lieutenant. According to Titus Livy, a famous Roman historian, the young Lieutenant Hannibal reminded soldiers of the great hero Hamilcar. They saw the same strength in Hannibal's face and gleam in his eye, and neither did the soldiers feel more confidence and boldness under any other leader. Hannibal's ability to command would soon be tested. One night, in 221 BC, a Celtic assassin slipped past several guards and killed Hasdrubal in his bed. Hannibal's training had come to an end. Chapter 4, A New Leader. Hannibal is chosen and quickly breaks the peace with Rome. With Hasdrubal dead, government leaders in Carthage sent word that the soldiers themselves should determine who would take his place. When the soldiers were assembled, Hannibal's name was immediately shouted out. A huge cheer rang through the ranks. Carthaginians, Iberians, and northern African tribesmen all stamped their feet and banged their shields in support. This is a picture of Saguntum, an Iberian city allied with Rome during that time. So, by popular demand, Hannibal Barca took command of the army of New Carthage. He was 26 years old at the time. No one knows for sure what he looked like. Being of North African descent, his skin would probably have been dark. By all accounts, he was a powerfully built man. Something in his attitude inspired confidence among his men and fear in his enemies. Hannibal stood and assured his soldiers that together they would enjoy many victories. His words were translated into the various languages of his soldiers and passed throughout the assembled army. Hannibal, however, had more on his mind than speeches. He immediately sought to strengthen Carthage's alliance with the tribes of Spain. He married Emilce, the daughter of a powerful tribal leader. Little is known about her. She would barely see her husband in the years to come. With his men in high spirits, Hannibal immediately went to war. The army marched out of New Carthage. They moved into the highlands northwest of their capital. In 2 years of fighting, they scored hard-won victories against several tribes, expanding Carthage's power into the center of Iberia. Then, ignoring his brother-in-law's treaty and warnings from Rome, Hannibal led thousands of cheering soldiers to Saguntum. In the spring of 219 BC, they laid siege to the city. They set up battering rams to break through the city walls and catapults to hurl stones over them. Again and again, Hannibal sent his men racing at the city walls. Roman arrows, javelins, and stones rained down on them. Losses were heavy, and Hannibal had to settle in and wait. Meanwhile, Rome sent an angry delegation to Carthage. The Roman ambassador stood before the Carthaginian Senate and demanded to know whether its members had approved Hannibal's attack on Saguntum. Finally, a Roman ambassador gave the Carthaginian Senate a choice. Send Hannibal to Rome in chains, or Rome would attack. We bring you war or peace, the ambassador said. Take which you please. The senators signaled their answer with a defiant shout. Carthage would never hand over its commanding general to Rome. The Roman ambassador left the Senate knowing that his efforts had failed. The Second Punic War was about to begin. At least one member of the Senate felt that Carthage had just sealed its own fate. When the Romans had left, Hanno, the leading opponent of the Barcas, stood up and complained about Hannibal. I feel nothing but loathing and detestation for the youth who is kindling this war, he said to the senators. He ought to be sent to the farthest corner of the earth where it would be impossible for him to disturb the welfare and tranquility of our state. But in Iberia, Hannibal's war machine was moving too fast to stop. Late in the year, his men broke through Saguntum's defense and poured into the city. Many of its inhabitants made bonfires with their possessions and leaped into the flames rather than face Hannibal's brutal soldiers. The army killed thousands of Saguntines and stole anything of value. Hannibal saw to it that his men were well paid and sent the rest of the spoils to Carthage. He sent most of his Iberian soldiers home to rest for the winter. As the men bid Hannibal farewell, they could hardly have imagined his plans for the spring. And here's a painting of Hannibal on horseback. Hannibal's men. The army that Hannibal commanded during the Second Punic War was a truly international force. His troops were mostly mercenaries, paid soldiers from territories conquered by or allied with the Punic Empire. These men spoke many different languages and shared few customs. The North African kingdom of Numidia supplied Hannibal with the best cavalry in the world. Numidians rode without saddles or bridles, wielding javelins and spears. They rode in formation, making sudden turns on the battlefield to confuse the enemy. The Balearic Islands off the coast of Spain gave Hannibal thousands of slingers. They used two types of slings to deadly effect. One allowed them to hurl stones long distances into a mass of enemy troops. Another allowed for sharpshooting at closer range. They were a rowdy bunch known for their enthusiastic looting of conquered towns. The Celts and Iberians of Spain provided many tough foot soldiers. They were experienced fighters who used short swords to cut and slash. The tribes also provided cavalry that rode two soldiers to a horse. In battle, one soldier quickly dismounted to fight on the ground. From Libya, Hannibal got thousands of steadfast and deadly infantry. Hannibal had absolute confidence in their training and discipline. He used them for massive assaults as well as for much smaller guerrilla operations. In Italy, Hannibal would later recruit thousands of Gauls to join the infantry. Ancient enemies of Rome, they fought without armor, carried long swords, and were vicious attackers. But in a long battle, they often lost resolve to fight. For this reason, Hannibal generally sent them into enemy lines first and backed them up with the Libyans. And here's a picture of the Numidian cavalry. Okay, and that is the end of chapter 4. And the next time we will read the next chapter, starting in chapter 5. All right, thanks. Bye, guys.